There is a curious thing about human beings. We often imagine that great change must arrive with great noise. We wait for a dramatic moment, a life-altering revelation, or some extraordinary burst of motivation that will suddenly transform us into the person we wish to become. Yet, when we examine our lives honestly, we discover that our days are not shaped by grand decisions, nearly as much as they are shaped by the small actions we repeat without thinking. The mind understands this more clearly than we like to admit. It knows that a single habit, practiced faithfully, possesses a strange and quiet power. One habit can alter the direction of a year can alter the direction of a life. Yet the same mind that recognizes this truth often resists it. It invents delays, creates distractions, and persuades us that tomorrow is somehow a more suitable day to begin than today. What makes this struggle so fascinating is that the obstacle is rarely ignorance. Most people already know what they should do. They know the book they ought to read, the exercise they ought to begin, the conversation they ought to have, the discipline they ought to practice. The conflict exists not between knowledge and mystery, but between knowledge and action. Somewhere within us, there is a part that sees the door to a better future, and another part that hesitates to turn the handle. There is a peculiar habit of mind that seems common to nearly all people. We imagine that the conditions necessary for change belong to some future moment rather than the present one. We tell ourselves that we will begin when circumstances improve, when our schedule becomes less crowded, when our energy returns, when our confidence grows, or when life finally arranges itself into a more favorable shape. The future in our imagination appears remarkably generous. It is always prepared to offer us opportunities that the present refuses to provide. Yet the present moment possesses one advantage that the future never has. It actually exists. The perfect moment is often treated as though it were waiting somewhere ahead of us, like a train that has not yet arrived at the station. We stand on the platform of our own lives believing that when it finally appears, everything will become easier. We assume that motivation will be stronger, discipline will come more naturally, and the obstacles that trouble us today will somehow lose their power. What is strange is that this expectation survives repeated disappointment. Many people can look back over years and see countless examples of postponed intentions. They can remember goals they intended to pursue, skills they intended to learn, habits they intended to build. The promised future arrived, yet it carried many of the same difficulties that existed before. The person who believed they would start next month often discovers that next month has simply become another version of today. Part of the problem is that we misunderstand the nature of action itself. We imagine that successful people act because they feel ready, while unsuccessful people fail because they do not. But readiness is frequently a result of action rather than a cause of it. Confidence grows after repeated effort. Clarity develops after engagement. Strength emerges after resistance has been faced. Many of the qualities we wait to possess can only be acquired by beginning before we possess them. The mind, however, prefers certainty. It would rather delay than risk failure. If a person never begins, they can continue imagining success without ever confronting the possibility of disappointment. There is a certain comfort in postponement. An unfinished ambition can remain perfect in the imagination, because reality has never been allowed to test it. This explains why procrastination often disguises itself as wisdom. It rarely announces itself honestly. It does not say, "I am afraid." Instead it says, "The timing is not right." It presents caution as intelligence and delay as preparation. A person may spend months convincing themselves that they are waiting for the ideal opportunity when, in truth, they are merely protecting themselves from discomfort. There is another illusion hidden within the search for the perfect moment. We assume that important changes must begin under impressive circumstances. We imagine a dramatic morning, a sudden surge of inspiration, or a life-changing realization. Yet most transformations enter a person's life quietly. A habit begins on an ordinary Tuesday. A decision is made during an unremarkable afternoon. A new direction starts not with excitement, but with a simple act repeated consistently. History, both personal and collective, contains countless examples of small beginnings. Great achievements often emerge from actions that seemed insignificant at the time. The individual taking the first step rarely possesses a complete vision of where the path will lead. They simply choose movement over hesitation. The search for the perfect moment therefore becomes a strange contradiction. We wait for conditions that can only be created through action itself. We expect certainty before experience, confidence before effort, and progress before beginning. Meanwhile, the ordinary moments we dismiss continue passing by, each one carrying possibilities that are invisible precisely because they appear so ordinary. The opportunity we seek often arrives disguised as the present moment, demanding neither perfect confidence nor perfect conditions, but only the willingness to begin before either one appears. Most people are willing to acknowledge that major decisions influence the course of their lives. Choosing a career, entering a relationship, moving to a new place, or pursuing a particular goal are obviously significant events. What receives far less attention are the small actions that occur between these milestones. We tend to notice the destination while overlooking the countless steps that carried us there. There is something in human nature that is attracted to dramatic causes and dramatic effects. We enjoy stories about sudden transformations because they appear exciting and memorable. A single decision, a powerful realization, or a moment of extraordinary courage seems more impressive than the quiet repetition of ordinary behavior. Yet when we examine life carefully, it becomes difficult to avoid the conclusion that destiny is often shaped less by occasional decisions and more by recurring habits. A habit appears insignificant precisely because each individual act seems too small to matter. Reading 10 pages of a book feels unimportant. Exercising for 20 minutes seems unlikely to change anything. Waking up slightly earlier, saving a small amount of money, practicing a skill for a short period, or choosing a healthier meal can all appear trivial when viewed in isolation. The mind looks at a single action and concludes that it carries little weight. What the mind frequently fails to recognize is that habits are not isolated events. They are patterns. Their power comes not from what they accomplish once, but from what they accomplish repeatedly. A drop of water appears weak, yet the steady movement of water can shape stone. Small actions acquire strength through accumulation. The consequences of habits are often delayed, which makes them even easier to underestimate. If a person skips one workout, very little appears to happen. If they neglect one day of study, the world remains unchanged. If they waste a single evening, no obvious disaster follows. Because the immediate cost seems small, the behavior feels harmless. The same principle operates in the opposite direction. A single workout does not create exceptional fitness. One day of discipline does not transform character. One productive evening does not guarantee success. Because positive habits also produce results slowly, people sometimes abandon them before their benefits become visible. Human beings naturally pay close attention to immediate consequences. We notice what happens today more easily than what will happen 6 months from now. This tendency creates a dangerous illusion. We judge habits according to their short-term effects while their true significance lies in their long-term influence. The person who reads every day may notice little difference after a week. After several years, however, they possess knowledge, understanding, and perspective that would have seemed impossible at the beginning. The person who consistently practices a skill may feel mediocre for a long time, yet eventually reaches a level that appears remarkable to others. What seems like talent from a distance is often the accumulated result of habits repeated faithfully over time. There is also a deeper reason habits matter. They do not merely affect what we achieve, they affect who we become. Every repeated action carries a subtle message about identity. A person who continually keeps promises to themselves gradually becomes someone who trusts their own word. A person who repeatedly avoids responsibility slowly becomes accustomed to avoidance. Character is not formed in a single moment. It is shaped through countless small choices that are repeated until they become familiar. This is why habits possess such extraordinary influence. They operate quietly beneath the surface of daily life, often escaping our attention. While we focus on goals, habits are determining whether those goals move closer or farther away. While we think about the future, habits are constructing it piece by piece through ordinary actions that appear too small to deserve notice. The future rarely arrives all at once. It emerges gradually from patterns repeated so often that they become part of the structure of a person's life. What appears to be destiny is frequently the accumulated result of behaviors that once seemed too insignificant to matter. One of the more puzzling features of human nature is that we are capable of desiring something sincerely while simultaneously resisting it. A person may genuinely wish to become healthier, more disciplined, more knowledgeable, or more productive, yet find themselves repeatedly moving in the opposite direction. This contradiction can be frustrating because it appears irrational. If we truly want a better life, why do we so often resist the very actions that would help create it? The common explanation is that people simply lack willpower. While there may be some truth in this, it does not fully account for the complexity of the struggle. The obstacle is often deeper than a shortage of determination. There exists within the mind a hidden resistance that does not always announce itself openly. It works quietly, disguising itself as logic, caution, comfort, or even wisdom. Most people imagine that their greatest enemy is external difficulty. They blame circumstances, distractions, lack of opportunity, or unfavorable conditions. Yet there are countless examples of individuals who possessed fewer advantages and still managed to move forward. The more interesting conflict frequently takes place within the individual rather than around them. The mind has a remarkable ability to protect what is familiar. Familiarity provides a sense of security, even when the familiar condition is unpleasant. A person may dislike their current situation and complain about it constantly, yet still resist meaningful change because change introduces uncertainty. The known discomfort often feels safer than the unknown possibility. This tendency explains why people sometimes remain trapped in habits they openly dislike. The habit may be harmful, unproductive, or discouraging, but it is predictable. The mind knows what to expect. Breaking that pattern requires entering unfamiliar territory, and unfamiliar territory always carries a degree of risk. There is also the matter of effort. The human brain naturally seeks efficiency. It prefers paths that require less energy and fewer demands. Habits that have been repeated for years become automatic, while new behaviors require attention and discipline. As a result, the mind often interprets growth as inconvenience. It quietly suggests that the challenge can be postponed, reduced, or avoided altogether. What makes this resistance particularly difficult to recognize is that it rarely appears in an obvious form. Very few people wake up and consciously decide to sabotage their own progress. Instead, resistance disguises itself behind reasonable excuses. It says that more preparation is needed. It suggests waiting until motivation increases. It argues that conditions are not ideal. It encourages endless planning while discouraging action. Because these explanations sound sensible, they are rarely questioned. A person can spend months believing they are being thoughtful and strategic when they are actually avoiding discomfort. The mind becomes remarkably skilled at creating arguments that justify remaining exactly where it is. Fear plays a significant role in this process as well. Many people assume they fear failure, but failure is only part of the story. Success can be unsettling too. Genuine change often requires abandoning familiar identities and patterns. The person who becomes disciplined can no longer rely on excuses. The person who develops confidence can no longer hide behind self-doubt. Growth carries responsibilities that comfort does not. For this reason, resistance is not always directed against failure. Sometimes it is directed against transformation itself. The mind senses that meaningful change will require a different version of the self, and part of it hesitates. It clings to old habits, old narratives, and old limitations because they are known and understandable. This hidden resistance explains why knowledge alone is rarely enough. People often know what they should do. They understand the benefits of discipline, consistency, patience, and effort. The challenge is not discovering the path, but overcoming the internal forces that quietly discourage walking it. The struggle therefore becomes less about acquiring information and more about recognizing the subtle ways the mind protects its comfort. Beneath procrastination, hesitation, and endless preparation, there is often a desire to preserve familiarity, even when familiarity is preventing growth. The battle is not merely against difficult circumstances, but against the quiet voice that continually persuades us that remaining unchanged is somehow the safer choice. One of the most revealing facts about human nature is that knowing the right thing and doing the right thing are often separated by a surprisingly wide distance. We tend to assume that knowledge naturally leads to action. If a person understands what is beneficial, we expect them to pursue it. If they recognize what is harmful, we expect them to avoid it. Yet everyday experience provides endless evidence that this assumption is incomplete. A person may know the value of exercise and remain inactive. They may understand the importance of discipline and continue procrastinating. They may recognize the benefits of patience, honesty, focus, or consistency and still fail to practice them. The problem cannot always be blamed on ignorance because the necessary information is frequently already present. Modern life makes this reality even more apparent. Never before have people possessed such easy access to knowledge. Advice, instruction, and education are available almost everywhere. Entire libraries of information can be reached within moments. Yet despite this abundance of knowledge, many individuals continue struggling with the same challenges. This suggests that information alone is not the force that transforms a life. There is a temptation to believe that one more book, one more lesson, or one more piece of advice will finally provide the answer. We imagine that somewhere there exists a missing insight that will suddenly make action effortless. As a result, people often become collectors of knowledge rather than practitioners of it. They gather ideas, memorize principles, and consume endless content while making little practical change. Knowledge possesses a certain comfort because it creates the feeling of progress without requiring the risks associated with action. Learning about discipline is easier than practicing discipline. Reading about courage is easier than acting courageously. Studying success demands far less effort than pursuing it. The mind can mistake preparation for achievement and education for transformation. This does not mean knowledge lacks value. Knowledge is essential. Without understanding, action can become misguided or ineffective. The problem arises when knowledge is treated as the final destination rather than the beginning of the journey. Information can illuminate the path, but it cannot walk the path on our behalf. There is another reason action proves more difficult than understanding. Knowledge primarily engages the intellect, while action demands participation from the entire person. It requires effort, sacrifice, patience, and persistence. The mind may agree with a principle instantly, but the habits, emotions, and desires of an individual often require much longer to align with that principle. Consider how easily a person can recognize a useful habit. They may understand exactly what needs to be done. The challenge begins when that understanding collides with discomfort. Waking up earlier feels difficult. Maintaining focus requires effort. Delaying gratification demands self-control. In these moments, knowledge remains unchanged, yet behavior often falters. The gap between knowledge and action exists because action always involves cost. It demands time, energy, and commitment. Understanding a truth does not require the same sacrifice as living according to it. A person can admire discipline while avoiding disciplined behavior. They can respect perseverance while abandoning difficult tasks. They can praise consistency while remaining inconsistent. What makes this especially interesting is that people often judge themselves by their intentions rather than their actions. If they know what should be done and sincerely intend to do it someday, they may feel closer to the goal than they truly are. The mind derives satisfaction from agreement with an idea, even when no corresponding behavior follows. This creates a subtle illusion. A person may possess extensive knowledge and still experience little growth, because growth occurs through repeated action rather than repeated understanding. Ideas influence life only when they move from thought into practice. Until then, they remain possibilities rather than realities. The difference between the life a person imagines and the life they experience is frequently determined by this simple distinction. Many people know what would improve their circumstances. Many understand the habits, choices, and disciplines that could move them forward. The decisive factor is rarely the absence of knowledge, but the willingness to convert knowledge into action, allowing principles to become behaviors and understanding to become practice. Human beings often imagine the future as something distant and separate from the choices they make today. We think of the future as a place we eventually arrive at, rather than something we are constantly creating. Because of this, many people underestimate the significance of a single daily choice. They assume that meaningful change requires dramatic action, while ordinary decisions seem too small to alter the direction of a life. Yet if we observe the way lives actually unfold, a different picture begins to emerge. The future is rarely shaped by one extraordinary event. More often, it is formed through countless ordinary moments that appear insignificant while they are occurring. A person's destiny is not merely influenced by major decisions, it is quietly constructed through the repeated choices that fill their days. Every day presents opportunities that seem almost too small to matter. A decision to read rather than scroll endlessly through distractions. A decision to complete an important task rather than postpone it. A decision to exercise, to practice a skill, to save money, to learn something useful, or to keep a promise made to oneself. None of these choices appear particularly powerful when viewed in isolation. The individual action often feels insignificant. The difficulty lies in the fact that consequences are usually invisible at first. Human beings naturally pay attention to immediate results. We want evidence that our efforts are producing change. When that evidence fails to appear quickly, we become discouraged. A person may choose discipline for a day and notice little difference. They may remain consistent for a week and still see only modest progress. Because the reward is delayed, the action can feel unimportant. What we fail to appreciate is that daily choices operate much like seeds. A seed appears small, unimpressive, and easy to overlook. Nothing about its appearance suggests the magnitude of what it may eventually become. Yet within it exists the potential for growth. The same principle applies to decisions. A single choice may seem insignificant today, while containing consequences that will become visible only after months or years have passed. This process works regardless of whether the choices are beneficial or harmful. Positive actions accumulate gradually, but so do negative ones. A person does not suddenly become unhealthy, financially unstable, or unproductive overnight. Such conditions often emerge through patterns repeated over time. Small compromises repeated frequently enough eventually create outcomes that seem surprisingly large compared to their beginnings. The reverse is equally true. Great achievements often begin with actions that appeared ordinary when they first occurred. The successful writer begins by writing a few pages. The skilled musician begins with imperfect practice. The disciplined individual begins by honoring small commitments. Looking backward, people often see impressive results. Looking forward, from the beginning, those same results were hidden inside seemingly minor choices. There is another aspect of daily decisions that is even more significant. They do not merely influence external circumstances, they shape internal character. Every choice teaches something about who we are becoming. When a person repeatedly chooses discipline over comfort, patience over impulsiveness, or responsibility over avoidance, they gradually develop qualities that extend beyond any single action. Character is often misunderstood as something fixed and permanent. In reality, it is continuously shaped by behavior. The person we become tomorrow is closely connected to the choices we make today. Repeated action strengthens certain tendencies while weakening others. Courage grows through courageous acts. Discipline grows through disciplined behavior. Confidence develops through keeping commitments and following through on intentions. This means that daily choices possess a creative power that is easy to overlook. They influence both the direction of our lives and the kind of person we become while traveling that direction. Every decision, however small, participates in the construction of a future self. What appears to be an ordinary moment is often far more significant than it seems because it contributes another piece to the pattern from which a life is formed. The future is therefore not waiting passively ahead of us. It is being shaped continuously through actions that seem ordinary, choices that seem small, and decisions that often pass unnoticed except for the lasting influence they leave upon the person making them. There is a tendency among human beings to think of identity as something fixed, something that simply exists within us independent of our actions. We often speak as though character were a permanent possession, already completed and waiting to be discovered. A person may say, "That is just who I am," as though the matter has been settled once and for all. Yet a closer examination of life suggests something quite different. The person we become is not merely revealed by our habits, it is shaped by them. Every habit, no matter how small, carries a hidden influence upon identity. When repeated often enough, an action ceases to be an isolated event and begins to form part of a pattern. Over time, these patterns become so familiar that they feel natural. What once required effort eventually becomes automatic. The behavior settles into the structure of daily life, and with it, certain qualities of character begin to take root. This process is so gradual that it frequently escapes notice. A person does not wake up one morning transformed into a disciplined individual, nor do they suddenly become careless, focused, confident, or unreliable. Such qualities develop through repetition. They emerge from countless ordinary moments in which choices are made and reinforced. Because the change occurs slowly, people often fail to recognize its significance until much later. Consider the individual who consistently keeps promises made to themselves. Perhaps the promises are small at first. They decide to wake up at a certain time, complete a task, exercise regularly, or dedicate a portion of each day to learning. None of these actions appear dramatic, yet each time the promise is honored, something subtle occurs. The person begins to establish trust in their own word. They learn that their intentions are capable of becoming reality. Now consider the opposite pattern. A person repeatedly delays action, abandons commitments, and makes excuses for unfinished responsibilities. These actions may seem minor when viewed individually. However, repetition gives them power. Gradually, a different identity begins to form. The individual becomes accustomed to avoiding discomfort and learns to expect little from their own intentions. Habits are not simply activities. They are lessons continually teaching us who we are. What makes this especially important is that the mind often follows evidence. We tend to believe what our actions repeatedly demonstrate. Confidence, for example, is frequently misunderstood as a feeling that appears before action. In reality, genuine confidence often grows from evidence accumulated over time. When a person consistently follows through on commitments, they develop reason to trust themselves. Their belief is supported by experience rather than wishful thinking. The same principle applies to discipline. Many people wait to feel disciplined before acting, yet discipline is usually the result of disciplined behavior rather than its cause. Each act of consistency contributes another piece to an emerging identity. Over time, the individual begins to see themselves differently because their actions have provided proof of who they are becoming. There is a profound difference between goals and identity. Goals concern what we want to achieve. Identity concerns who we are becoming. A person may set a goal to write a book, lose weight, start a business, or learn a skill. These ambitions are valuable, but habits operate on a deeper level. They influence whether the individual becomes the kind of person capable of achieving such goals consistently. This explains why habits possess such lasting influence. Achievements may come and go. Successes can be gained and lost. Circumstances can change unexpectedly. Yet the character formed through repeated behavior remains. The habits practiced today are constructing the person who will face tomorrow's opportunities and challenges. Every repeated action, therefore, carries greater significance than it first appears to possess. A habit is never merely a habit. It is a vote cast for a particular version of oneself. Each act of discipline strengthens the identity of a disciplined person. Each act of responsibility reinforces the identity of a responsible person. Each act of courage contributes to the identity of someone who faces fear rather than retreats from it. Whether we notice it or not, our habits are continually shaping the person we are becoming. The future self we eventually meet is not being created in rare moments of inspiration, but in ordinary actions repeated day after day, quietly building a character that reflects the choices we have practiced most often.